Hello and welcome to The Farm. On the show this week, 2 transfer pricing circulars that result in more confusion than clarity. And has the CERC decision in the Adani case opened the floodgates to contract renegotiation? Clarity. This was the single goal of the Rangachari committee that was set up last year by the Prime Minister. Clarity on how transfer pricing principles should be applied to the over 750 MNC development centres in India. The committee submitted its report in September last year, the contents of which were not made public. Then last week, CBDT issued 2 circulars on the issue. So after almost a year-long wait, have we finally achieved that clarity, or is the industry worse off? Paiswani Upadhyay gets you some answers.
GE, Microsoft, IBM, Capgemini and over 750 such MNCs carry out product development, analytical work, software development through captive entities in India. Setting up of development centers comes with the benefits of a low-cost labor market for these companies and growth of services sector for India.
Typically, the business model works like this. There is a foreign MNC company that is, say, headquartered in the United States or in Europe, in Germany. Let's take US as an example. And it will do its own R&D in the US as well. Now, with respect to further research and development in the most cost-effective manner, it may actually look at procuring R&D services across the world. So the way the model will work is that it will probably have an R&D center in India, in Shanghai, in Brazil, or wherever the company finds it most cost-effective to do R&D. Now, these centers, such as the one that is set up in India, is actually a contract service provider, as in there is an arrangement of a service provider and a foreign, a service provider that is providing its services to a company in the US.
And the point of contention between industry and the tax department has been the remuneration that the Indian Development Center receives for the services it provides.
There have been cases where the tax authorities have come and said that the Indian multinational, for example, if it is being remunerated at cost plus a 15%, the tax authorities have come back and say that the correct margin ought not to be 15% but ought to be 20%, 25%, whatever. And those percentages vary depending on who is the officer, at what location, how does he perceive risk, functions and assets, etc. But there is a set of SSCs where the officers have gone ahead and stated that really speaking a cost plus is not a right methodology for remunerating, and that part of the profits which accrue to the foreign principal overseas ought to be taxed in India, because India is developing intangibles and transferring those intangibles, and to remunerate India for those intangibles, what you need is a profit split method.
It is to bridge this gap between industry practice and the department's approach that the Prime Minister set up a committee last year. Chaired by former CBDT chairman N. Rangachari, the committee was set up with a view to make India a competitive market for development centers.
If you have a very large organization outside India, which has the head of R&D, maybe 500 PhDs sitting there, who are conceiving various ideas, and those ideas are then converted into algorithms and designs and then sent down to development centers like India and China and various other countries for an actual execution, then based on the OECD commentary or OECD guidelines, it would mean that the Indian Development Center is only providing routine services, needs to be compensated for the services and nothing more than the services.
When it comes to the cost of development and the funds that are available for a company with respect to cost of development, it is a very fungible kind of a capital that is available. The company will decide what is the most cost-effective jurisdiction and what is the most cost-effective way to apply that capital to get the maximum return on research and development. Now, if the competitiveness of India reduces because of the way we tax our R&D centers, in the short term, perhaps there will be some gain that the revenue will have. But in the long term, the competitiveness of the country and its ability to encourage innovation, use our talent pool of engineering, that will suffer.
But what the CBDT issued last week is a far cry from the committee's proposals. The department issued 2 circulars last week. First one provides clarity on profit split method or PSM. The Income Tax Act allows the tax department to use PSM in cases where the arm's length price cannot be calculated because the transaction involves transfer of unique intangibles, or in case of multiple transactions which cannot be evaluated separately. The new circular now clarifies that the officer will need to record his reasons for not using the PSM method before considering other methods like transactional net margin method.
It's paragraph number 1 of circular number 2, which is really critical, which seems to suggest that profit split method is the method which is applicable in the context of research and development and transfer of intangibles. And that circular has absolutely nothing to do with what Rangachari committee stated, because that circular is a circular which lays down a proposition of the government. So the issue which the circular seems to suggest is to say that when you do research, cost plus can never be the basis on how a research is remunerated. It ought to be remunerated for the intangibles that is generated, and therefore it mandates, so to say, that profit split method is the right method, and if an officer came to a contrary conclusion, he needs to document it. And I must say personally that I do not agree with this approach at all.
None of the contract R&D services centers that we know of, there is a profit split being applied at all. Typically and theoretically, profit split is applied in situations where we are talking about a cost contribution agreement where, say, a bunch of parties get together, pool in their funds, and they want a return out of that. Or you see that in pharmaceutical companies or, oil and gas companies doing some sort of research together as a group. Also, in full risk entrepreneurial R&D companies, there could possibility be of applying a profit split.
And that's where experts say the disconnect is. The second circular deals with development centers engaged in contract R&D services with insignificant risks. It lays down that an R&D development center in India will be categorized as contract R&D only if it complies with all these conditions. That the significant economic functions are performed by foreign entity, economically significant assets for R&D are provided by the foreign partner, and core functions, control and risk lies with the foreign partner. But all these factors will not be recognized if they exist purely on paper or if the foreign entity is located in a low or no tax jurisdiction. Having said all of this, the circular does not conclude what method would be used to determine the arm's length price if the development center fulfills all these conditions.
The essence of this whole thing is that it concludes that a particular fact pattern will conclude that there is a contract R&D situation. But it doesn't get further on to say what is the implication of being a contract R&D. The industry wants to see that this needs to be closed with a clear clarification that once it is contract R&D, the method used would be a net margin method, or to say that in a negative way, that it will not be a profit split method.
The use of terminology within that circular which are not defined, well defined. So for example, what do you mean by significant economic risks? Now, if you use a term like that which is not defined at all, you are again leaving it to the vagaries of interpretation. Is for example the use of human resources something which would qualify as an intangible? We are dealing with employment of assets, whether those assets contain human capital, not contain, what is significant economic risk. So number of things which are stated down are so vague that at a practical level one will find again more a tendency to say that this circular does not apply, even assuming one could clarify that was transactional net margin method.
So seems like we took a full circle and came back to right where we started, or maybe even worse. Because as the experts in the story pointed out, the two circulars do not talk to each other. While one legitimizes profit split to be the method to calculate the arm's length price, the other gives no clarity on what will be the fate of a taxpayer even after he fulfills all the conditions of a contract R&D service provider. And if that was to be, then why the facade of setting up a committee whose report has not even been made public? In Mumbai, Paiswini Upadhyay.
Maybe now we should expect more circulars to clarify the earlier circulars. Well, on that note, let's take a quick break. Coming up on The Firm.
Has the CERC decision in the Adani case opened the floodgates to contract renegotiation?